Hi again, everybody. I'm Michael Tomasky. I'm the editor of the New Republic, and welcome to the new edition of Tomaskycast, a production of New Republic Video. And I am joined today, very pleased to be joined by the German ambassador to the United States, Ambassador Emily Haber. Ambassador, welcome.
Thank you, and thank you for having me.
Thanks so much for joining us. There's a lot to get to, but the first thing I want to explain for our viewers is this. You're a career diplomat who's not a member of a political party. I want to say this because Americans won't understand this because, of course, in our country, an ambassador to a high-level country like the United States would be, in all likelihood, a big donor to the head of state. You're not that.
Well, I can say with complete candor, I am not.
Yeah.
I'm not a donor, nor would I be capable to be one. Our system is different. We have a intricate civil service, and diplomats are part of this civil service. Obviously, nominations of ambassadors go through cabinet, and in the case of the big countries, it's usually there's usually a consensus between the chancellor and the foreign minister about the nomination. But it's not; they're not political appointees, and it happens very, very rarely that ambassadors are being sent into early retirement for political reasons.
So you were sent to Washington by the previous government, but retained by the current government.
That is correct. And I assume this is because ambassadors are expected to be fiercely loyal to their country and to Europe, fiercely loyal, in my case, to the transatlantic relationship, and fiercely loyal to the idea that there is so much more we can achieve if we work together.
So let me start with this. Were you ever posted to Russia or Ukraine?
Oh yes, and you know that.
Yeah.
I was posted to Moscow a couple of times. The first time in Soviet times, and the last time in between 1999 and 2002. I was trained a Soviet expert. And I was a Russian speaker in the 1980s, and I served at the Soviet and later Russian desk a couple of times.
You've met Putin?
I have not met Putin directly. I have seen him, but I have never shaken his hand, if that's meeting someone.
Yeah. So give me first just your personal reaction when you saw that the invasion had commenced.
I can't begin to explain that.
Yeah.
You see, the thing is, I have known and I've seen the evidence that indicated a possible invasion all along. And I personally had believed that it was more than possible, that it would probably happen, because you don't do such a military buildup and then all of a sudden say it was just an idea of mine and let's do diplomacy. It was just too big and took a too long time. And then I've never forgotten the principle that Putin usually does what he says. But you see, being aware of that in a very general and academic way is a completely different story than actually seeing a military invasion, seeing the aggression. In spite of my hunch that this would happen, seeing it was a different magnitude altogether. You see, historical comparisons are always wrong, but I think it's a fact to say that seeing this aggression, seeing this invasion does tap into memories in Europe of another aggression inflicted, frankly, on these very territories, and in that case by my country. So it just recalls memories of a terrible history, and I think that produced what you have seen over the weekend, the sea change in German strategic thinking.
Yeah.
It was the incredible and monumental gravity of a breach of civilization, I would say.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about that. I like so many Americans, and I think people the world over, saw Chancellor Scholz's comments on Sunday and were so heartened by them. We're in a new era, and all the other things he said. Just tell people a bit about your reaction to those words and the reactions in Germany more broadly.
Let's start with the reactions in Germany more broadly. I watched the speech in the very early hours of the morning on Sunday. And what I saw was standing ovations for the Ukrainian ambassador, who had been a fierce critic of German foreign policy before. I saw standing ovations and applause across the political spectrum, except for the far left and the far right. When the Chancellor announced the 2% goal for 2022 and the 100 billion euro fund in order to make sure that this will happen on a permanent basis. I saw the reactions already the day before when the export of military equipment to Ukraine was announced. That was yet another complete turning point. All of that showed me that there is a completely renewed sense of urgency in the face of the military aggression against Ukraine, an unprovoked military aggression against a sovereign and democratic country. That was the sea change. And you saw it on the streets in Germany on that very day in Berlin. Right. 500,000 people taking to the streets in solidarity with the Ukraine. I would say what I mentioned, actually, I'm returning to what I mentioned before, seeing the aggression, and many had not believed that this would actually happen, that this could actually happen. But seeing that someone was crossing this line and actually attacking the ruling principles of the European peace order, to which Russia had acceded to, just jettisoning them. That was an aggression against Ukraine, a terrible one. But it was also a massive challenge to the principles that govern our coexistence in Europe and the way we work together and the way we depend on each other. Yeah. That's a new chapter. It's a new story, and that required Germany to, as you say in German, jump over its own shadow.
Interesting. You are here, of course, in Washington, D.C., reading the American press, the Western press closely. You know that 3 weeks ago, most of America was pretty skeptical that your country would take this position. Tell people what it is about Chancellor Scholz, or is it something about him personally? You have known him for some time, so just talk about him and explain to people why you think he embraced this change.
He embraced the change because circumstances had changed. He had alluded before to the possible end of Nord Stream 2 should Russia decide to invade. At the time, people thought in the terms of a military operation, but this is no military operation. This is much more. He had been vague on how this and at what stage this would occur, and he has been criticized for it. But when I saw him and President Biden, and I was in the press conference myself, when the president said that Nord Stream 2 would not go forward in the case of a Russian invasion, and the chancellor said that everyone could be certain that every step taken by the American side would be mirrored, my words now, by the German side, it was blatantly clear to me that there was not a split, that actually things would happen in lockstep. not everyone, I'm aware of that, not everyone quite believed it. I heard some skepticism, but I think the direction already at the time was very clear. And then there was the issue of military equipment. That always comes difficult. That's a difficult decision for Germany. You know that there has been the long-standing tradition of what Germans used to call the culture of military restraint. There are historical reasons for that. They're not bad reasons, actually. There were quite good reasons. And that they entailed that Germany would not send weapons to crisis areas. Yeah. This policy also allowed Germany to let other countries do the heavy lifting stuff in terms of hard security. But what has been overlooked here is that in terms of soft security, in terms of support for, in that case, Ukrainian resilience and democracy and economy, we've done more than any other country in the world. We've always been committed to Ukrainian resilience and democracy. But there was this disconnect in terms of hard security. This disconnect has been closed. That's the sea change. Germany is now delivering, exporting weapons to Ukraine, manpads, anti-tank missiles, Stingers, fuel, protective gear, you name it, everything. And we're going through a long list that the Ukrainians have provided us. That's a massive turning point for Germany. And that's something that will probably redefine our role and the way we see our role in terms of hard security, both in NATO and the EU.
Let's just pause here for a second and explain to people how the government works. The government is a coalition of three parties.
Yes. Social
Democrats, who are the main left party historically, the Greens, and the Free Democratic Party, which is a centrist party. So just tell people the distribution of seats, if you will.
Correct. So it's the first time in German history that we have a three-party coalition. Mm-hmm. We always have coalitions, but they're usually two parties. And the election results in this year showed what we see elsewhere in Europe and elsewhere in democracies as well, and that is the tendency to have a more fragmented political landscape. It's not the case in the US, obviously, because of the binary system, but you see the fragmentation, I would contend, within the parties. Correct. So a three-party coalition means a completely different balance than a two-party system, because obviously the two smaller parties will be as strong or perhaps even collectively stronger than the large party. Yep. So that plays a role in decision-making. The Chancellor and all those around the table will always have to make sure that everyone's on board. Secondly, for the decision to be taken this weekend, it is important to know that both the Social Democrats and certainly the Greens have a long-standing pacifist tradition. It would come and must have come much more difficult to them to jettison previous concerns or previous reluctance given the history. But as they are in government, and I doubt whether if they had not been in government, whether this decision could have been taken that way. It probably required them to be in government and to embrace the responsibility in the face of the gravity of the situation. And mind you, the decision has been taken with a breakneck speed. The attack happened on a Thursday, and on Sunday morning, the German Chancellor, with both parties behind him, announced groundbreaking changes in the German security posture.
Now, the foreign minister, the defense minister, and the vice chancellor are all Greens. Is that correct?
Yes, correct.
Yeah. And what are the most prominent cabinet positions held by the Free Democrats, the centrist party?
Oh, and that's the finance ministry.
Finance minister.
The finance ministry, obviously, that's an important point, actually. Yeah. And I'm not sure that everyone sees that. The decision to set up the 1 billion euro fund, which is about 115 US dollars a fund, was possible in spite of the debt brake that we have, which is designed to limit expenditure, because the debt brake had been for a transition time been lifted because of COVID. So that opened a door, right? And that opened the door for the Chancellor to announce the creation of a fund that under normal conditions, given the debt brake, wouldn't have been possible. And all parties agreed. And as his announcement with the shadow of the agreement of the three coalition parties behind him, it will also probably be enshrined in the constitution. So for that, he certainly needed the consent, and more than the consent, the active support of the Liberal finance minister.
That's very interesting. Now, I have read subsequently, actually this morning on the Washington Post website, that there are some cracks showing within the SPD and the Greens, that the more left-leaning portion of the Social Democratic Party is beginning to say, "Hey, wait a second, we're not sure about all this military spending." How big are those cracks at this point?
We're a democracy. Of course, there are going to be discussions. The SPD is much larger in this parliament than it used to be in the previous parliament. Many of them are new members of parliament, and many of them used to be what the Social Democrats call the young socialists within the Democratic Party. They come with fierce commitment to the pacifist the pacifist traditions, but they also rose when the Chancellor announced the groundbreaking changes in our security, military, and by the way, also energy and foreign policy posture. So there will be discussions. There will be discussions on what to include. There will be different positions in the different wings of the parties. That's normal. It's a groundbreaking change in our foreign and security policy. Of course, there will be discussions. That's normal. And we'll take the decision, and you'll see that what the Chancellor has announced, along with the federal cabinet, will come.
In the long term, thinking about Europe, what do you see ramifications being a few years down the road of this change? Germany is the largest economy in Europe, the most powerful country in Europe. Where do you see the German-Russian relationship heading, first of all?
Oh, well, the German-Russian relationship
is over.
That's an ice age. It's an ice age. He has attacked another country.
Right.
He's conducting a terrible war. It was unprovoked. He has broken all commitments given to his partners, both in Europe and to the United States. He has prepared for a war. Wanting us to see that he does. We are in a completely different universe as regards the German-Russian relationship. As regards Europe, that is an interesting question, because previously Germany, by many Europeans, and actually many have criticized that at times, has been viewed as the largest country and the largest economy, as somewhat an economic, in European terms and in the European context, an economic giant. But in terms of security, not so much. And this divide between the security role and the economic role has featured or has met with considerable criticism over times. Now, obviously, a page has been turned. A country like Germany, the biggest country in Europe, the biggest economy, embracing its responsibility for security as well, will alter the conversations both in NATO and in Europe. You see, the Vice Chancellor was here in the beginning of the week for 2 days.
Yes.
And nearly every interlocutor who met with him praised German leadership. Now, I'm not quite sure whether I'm so comfortable with the expression, or any German is so comfortable with the expression of German leadership, because well, let's put it this way. If leadership means service, and if leadership means taking on responsibility that one can take on, that's fine with us. But I would assume that this context will be closely watched both in the framework of Europe and in the framework of NATO. While Germany may have changed, contexts haven't.
Well, that's interesting. Let me just ask then, since you're invoking World War II and 1941, that's obviously still pretty deeply felt, I guess. And that historical memory drives a lot of what's happening now still, all these years later.
I thought, I may be wrong, but I have felt when all this criticism was leveled against Germany over the past weeks before the actual outbreak of the war, was actually fed by historical memories. Mm-hmm. They were activated very quickly, I sensed, including here, by the way. Yeah. Because much of the discussion, while I understood some of the criticism, I also felt that many of the arguments were misrepresenting facts and completely discounting or willfully ignoring what Germany actually did, which was a lot, and completely ignoring also the German commitment to Ukraine. Mm-hmm. And my takeaway from the criticism over the past weeks is that we should not underestimate how quickly, in times of crisis, historical memories can be reinvigorated.
Yeah. Yes, quite so. So it still lingers. In these last few minutes, I want to ask you about where you think things may be headed in these next few days and weeks. What about the rest, for example? Well, first talk about Ukraine, and then I'd like you to talk about the other nations of what Putin calls the near abroad. And if I were a small d Democrat in Moldova or Kazakhstan or any of those countries, how nervous I should be. But start, please, with where you think you see events heading in Ukraine itself.
I'd be cautious to make predictions now into the 9th day of the war. And I believe that everyone in the very early hours of the outbreak of the war had predicted that Ukraine would collapse quickly, that Kiev would fall quickly, that the paramount military dominance of the Russian military would issue into an early capitulation and so forth. And none of that has happened. So far, the advance has happened much slower than many predicted. And I felt reminded of something someone said once to me, and that is, if the first shot goes off, everything is different. You're in a different paradigm. I think that's what we're seeing right now. Mm-hmm. So be cautious of prediction. all the parameter that I mentioned before, and that is the military dominance of Russia and so forth, they're still true. But there's so much we don't know, and we don't know what effect psychology and the environments will play. I don't mean to be optimistic, but just as a case in point, the ruble is due to the sanctions in free fall. The Russian central bank is cut off. Many Russian banks are cut off from international finance markets. The companies are, that's their decision, even if they're not targeted in terms of sanctions, are leaving Russia.
Yeah.
There is a very severe economic crisis underway, and we're only a couple of days into the sanctions. So be cautious, be aware of the fog of war that allows us only to see a segment of, or small segment probably, of what is all happening. But the outcome is pretty clear. The advance was very slow, much slower than predicted, and the collapse did not occur. Now, as to the what you call near abroad, what in
it's not what I call it. Understand?
No, I know. I was just going to say that near abroad is a subtext for Russia being entitled, or Russia having influence, a sphere of influence that either belongs to Russia or should be differential to Russia. And Putin, in the article he has written in summer last year, when he basically talked about Ukraine, has been quite clear about Russian revisionism being historically, having historical legitimacy. So that should make neighboring countries, smaller and bigger ones, very, very worried. I noted carefully how Kazakhstan, for example, has reacted, how Tokayev has reacted when distancing himself from the war in Ukraine. And mind you, the forces of the collective system of security had kept him in power when demonstrations occurred several weeks back. So you see both active concerns and trends to place distance between Russian claims and the interests of the neighboring countries. They don't want to be near abroad. Belarus may not have a chance of being anything else, although I find it indicative too that Belarus or the Belarusian dictator was behind the first attempt to get Russians and Ukrainians around the table, because the farther this war goes and the more Russia takes from Ukraine or in Ukraine, the greater the threat for Belarus as well.
Hey, by the way, the last question, then I'll let you go. But I was very surprised to see that Serbia voted to condemn the attack at the United Nations the other day. What do you think explains that?
It is, I think Serbia thought twice about its relationship with the European Union and its relationship with Russia. But I also noted that after having voted in favor, statements were made that put the vote into perspective. So you will continue to see a certain ambivalence.
I see. Okay, I better go do some more reading about that one. Emily Haber is the German ambassador to the United States, and this was really helpful and interesting. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Michael, for having me.